So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Family Support Technical Assistance Center's webinar, Breaking the Cycle, Family Supporting Youth in the Justice System. I'm Gail Cormier, the Project Director of NASDAC, the Family Center of Excellence. We are led by the National Federation of Families. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Before we start our presentation today, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. The recording, along with the PowerPoint presentation slides and any additional resources, will be uploaded on our events page after the presentation, and they will also be sent to you. All attendees will be muted for the presentations portion of today's webinar. However, we still look forward to hearing your questions, and we are happy to help you with any technical assistance issues you may have. To ask a question or request TA, please send a message in the chat box. We will be watching the chat during the entire presentation. If time allows, we will unmute and you will have an opportunity to ask questions. You can also raise your hand and use the hand button. When you leave the webinar, you will be redirected to complete a short feedback survey using the link provided. This survey will help us continuously improve our webinars, and it also fulfills our SAMHSA funding obligation to provide them with important data required by our contract. Please note, all information will be confidential and we will respect your privacy. We do not offer CEU credits for our webinars, but you will receive a certificate of attendance immediately after you fill out the survey. So you will go to the survey, fill out the survey. When you get out of the survey, your certificate will be there. I would like to thank SAMHSA for allowing us to share this information with you today. And again, thank you for joining us. It is now my honor to turn this webinar over to our guests so they can introduce themselves. Please enjoy. Michael?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gail. And I want to thank you and everyone at the National Family Support Technical Assistance Center and the National Federation of Families for the opportunity to speak with you all today. It's really wonderful to see that we have a national presence in terms of our audience today, really spanning coast to coast, really wonderful. As was mentioned, my name is Michael Lampierre. I am the director of the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at Georgetown University. And I'm joined today by my wonderful partner and friend, Jeanette Bocanegra, who will introduce herself in just a minute as well. But as you know from the correspondence regarding this webinar, today Jeanette and I are here to talk with you a little bit about the importance of family engagement, empowerment, and partnership in juvenile justice policy and practice. And our main goal today in this webinar is to share with you a framework that you all can use in order to assess how the juvenile justice system in your own jurisdiction is doing with respect to this most important endeavor. That is how your system in your community is engaging, empowering, and partnering with families. For those of you who may not be familiar with our work at the center, the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform is a research center housed within the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University that aims to improve the lives of young people who touch the justice system and those who are at risk of touching the justice system. And we do that by hosting a variety of dynamic research-based training and technical assistance programs and initiatives, including our certificate programs and practice models. Since our organization's inception in 2007, we've worked with literally hundreds of jurisdictions across the United States to advance a more holistic and multi-system and effective approach to serving young people and families. And as part of our efforts at the center, family engagement and partnership is a core principle that guides everything that we do. On a personal level, I am an attorney by training. Prior to becoming director of the center, I served as a public defender here in the District of Columbia, where I represented young people in the justice system and later served as a juvenile justice administrator in the district, including as chief of staff of the cabinet level juvenile justice agency here, the DC Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services. And as I mentioned, my co-presenter today is the wonderful Jeanette Bocanegra. So I'd like to turn to Jeanette now for her to say hello and introduce herself as well.
I just love the shout out that you was giving all the folks that are here, Gail. I feel like this is a family affair of amazing folks that are joining us today. So thank you. I'm also honored and grateful to be here. My name is Jeanette Bocanegra, and I am the Executive Director for Justice for Families, a national alliance of community members of families impacted by the juvenile justice system. Our two main goals are to transform the juvenile justice system so that it is driven by the interests of our young people and our families, and move away those resources that have been tough on crime and incarceration, and resources that have not worked for far too long, back into those communities that have been mostly impacted. On a personal level, I am a mother of 6. I live in New York, so a big shout out to all those New Yorkers that are here. I also love the fact that we have families from across the country. Thank you and welcome. The issues are all the same. I live in a community that incarceration and just the harm of many systems is a revolving door. And for a very long time, I felt like a proud mom working for a nonprofit in the public school system. My kids weren't touched by no system. And in 2010, I got a horrible taste of the juvenile justice system and how harmful that is, not to just a young person, where it disrupts their development, but the domino effect that it caused my family and my community. So, you know, I'm going to share much in this small time frame that we have, but I'm also grateful because I get nervous when I'm going to present, and I get anxious, but I also am very hopeful, because every single one of us, we're like a piece of a puzzle, and it's a 500 pieces. And to put a puzzle together, if we don't see the clear picture, it can be very challenging. If there's a piece missing, it can also be very challenging. But each and one of us, we play a crucial role in the development and the support of our young people and our communities. And again, it takes a village to raise children. Whether we're a parent or a professional, parents are professional as well, but we need to support each other in order to see positive outcomes. And everyone wants the best for their children. So thank you, and I'm grateful, and I'm hoping that this would not be the last conversation that we all can have. My email is there. Michael, reach out to us. We're here to provide all the support that we need to make sure that all our children, whether they're in Seattle, Washington, or in New York, or in North Carolina, that all our children have an opportunity to be well. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. And Jeanette is a longtime and wonderful partner of ours at the center, and has just a compelling personal story, but in her leadership at Justice for Families is doing tremendous amount of work to reshape justice systems in a way that really supports young people and families to succeed. So I want to begin our discussion today with an assertion and a proposition that I hope that you all agree with and fully embrace, which is this: family engagement, empowerment, and partnership must be a core value and guiding principle that permeates everything that is done in the juvenile justice context. And the reason for this, in our view, is simple. Across the board, when we look at research around the outcomes that we seek in supporting young people and families, research over and over again indicates that when families are involved, when they're engaged, when they receive direct services and supports, we simply see better outcomes for all, whether that's research on family-centered programming, research on substance use treatment, research on juvenile reentry practices, a whole host of different areas. We continue to see this clear link between family engagement and those positive outcomes, whether they're related to increased public safety, increased youth and family well-being. And in our view, the reason for this is quite logical and straightforward, which is that families have extraordinary strengths and assets that they bring to the table. They know their children better than anyone else. They're the true experts on their needs and their strengths. And the bonds that families maintain with their children really are unique and serve as a powerful influence on youth's development, on their behavior, on their decision-making, on their transition to adulthood. So for all of these reasons, including the fact that the overwhelming majority of young people who touch the juvenile justice system will ultimately return home to their families and their communities, it really is incumbent on juvenile justice staff to approach their work in a way that is meaningful and holistic and really working in hand with young people and families. On the next slide, we wanted to just acknowledge that while over the years, juvenile justice leaders and staff have recognized the power of engaging and empowering families in the way that we'll talk about. And despite that, several problematic practices continue throughout our country, and you see some of them reflected on this slide. In our view, and in my view, in Jeanette's view, and in others' views, far too many young people continue to be incarcerated in detention and commitment facilities across the United States. And this has significant ramifications on how families can stay connected and support their young people over the long run. Now, to be clear, over the last 20 plus years, the number of young people incarcerated in the juvenile justice system has actually dropped dramatically. In 1997, for example, according to one-day snapshot data collected by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention within the US Department of Justice, there were about 105,000 young people held in out-of-placements nationally. When you look at those numbers today, what you'll see is that that number has been slashed by well more than 50%. Figures from 2019, for example, indicated that there were about 36,000 young people in these facilities across the country. Now, some scholars believe that those figures actually represent underreporting for a whole variety of factors. But the bottom line is that as we speak today, as we're having this webinar, there are literally tens of thousands of young people who are in detention and commitment facilities, separated from their homes, separated from their families, separated from their communities. And given the research on the harms of incarceration, particularly for a youth population that often has experienced trauma, that has experienced adverse childhood experiences, as well as the body of research that shows us that developmentally appropriate approaches are much more likely to improve public safety and advance youth and well-being, it's clear in our view that we as a country need to move towards a model that's not about punishment or incarceration, but rather one that invests in community-based services and supports so that kids can help, can be supported to develop their skills, to develop positive relationships with families and peers and others, while still promoting accountability for their behavior and the decision, and also repairing harm to the community when that occurs. In many justice systems, we also see here, and you see this reflected on the slide, that unfortunately system personnel may view families as the problem or the source of the youth's delinquency, as opposed to an essential partner. And we'll talk more about that in the course of this conversation, but studies, including reports done by Jeanette's wonderful organization have shown that families often report feeling blamed or judged by system officials for their children's involvement in the system, perpetuating those feelings of guilt and shame and isolation. Systems continue to exclude families from decision-making as well. We'll talk a little bit about that, whether that's in the case of case planning or service delivery. And then finally, we've seen far too many juvenile justice systems not think about this work holistically, really focusing on the kids' needs, but not as much on the family's needs. And ultimately, we know that the success of the young person is linked to the success of the family. And so thinking about connecting families directly to services, whether it's around housing, healthcare, transportation, or other social supports, becomes especially important. And unfortunately, in the juvenile justice context, what we see is that young people and families are left to navigate really complicated systems and do it in a way that doesn't appreciate the multiple responsibilities that they're juggling, particularly with respect to families, responsibilities around employment and childcare and their children's education and health. And so those barriers can really stand in the way of effective youth and family engagement. And Jeanette, I know that this has been a focus of the work at Justice for Families, so I wanted to turn to you just for you to elevate some of these challenges and the barriers that you've seen in your work.
I'm gonna share a little bit of how I had to learn how to navigate the juvenile justice system, and I've been advocating for families for quite some time. I'm gonna say now I'm almost 30 years of advocating for families, but primarily in the public school system. And in 2010, my son made a mistake in school where the school called the cops. So I learned that there was a school to prison pipeline. But I knew how to advocate for my child in school and for other families, other young people with IEPs. So I felt very confident that I would be able to advocate for my child. I'm in a courthouse now, and I'm not familiar with the language. I'm not familiar with who's who there. And I was telling folks, and I speak 2 languages, and I feel like I'm in a foreign country. Fast forward a little bit, I went to a conference. I got involved in a data research project with Justice for Families. And at that point, I never liked being part of a research project. I didn't like data. I was like, we can't continue being used as guinea pigs in communities and have data and then nothing, we don't do anything about it. And I was very fortunate because I worked on this research project. And when we talk about stigma and barriers, our research project, Justice for Families, Families Unlocking Futures. And in September of this year, it'll be 10 years that we released the report. And I became more aware, though, I live in those communities that it's a revolving door. It didn't hit home. But when it hit home, I realized it wasn't a system that was supporting or strengthening young people. I also learned that here in New York, for those who live in New York and in other states, it's different, but outcomes are just as horrible. Systems have not been doing a better job than parents. In New York, I learned that it was costing us in 2010 almost $300,000 to house one kid in a juvenile facility. And data shows that when young people are incarcerated, it disrupts their full development, a healthy development. I learned so much that I couldn't just have a report and not do anything about it. It was very alarming because during those times that I'm working on this research project, as a parent, I'm also experiencing all these negative, harmful things that young people have experienced, and not today, for generations. So the fact that the title of this webinar is Breaking the Cycle, some of us, even growing up, decided that we're going to break the cycle of what we've experienced. We want to be a better parent. We want to do better by our children. So I broke the cycle of how incarceration was going to treat myself and my children and all those others that I became more aware of. The report also highlighted the harmful things that young people experience, the things that no one as a human being should be able to experience. The report also highlighted that there was so much work that needs to be changed. And this is not just one system. We talk about juvenile justice, but prior to our young people reaching that system, there's the school system that may not be meeting the needs of a young person with unique needs and special needs, learning styles that are different. We also have a child welfare system that instead of supporting and strengthening families, the easiest thing to do is let's cut that tree out of the the neighborhood and plant it somewhere else so it can grow. We can't continue removing young people from communities because systems are going to do a better job. And there's data. You know, I love data now. Michael, you don't know how much data I work now on like 4 different research projects because I am saying to myself, whether I'm a community member or a leader, a national leader, bringing the voices of the unheard, that data tells a lot of story. That in order for us to really transform the system and to bring these changes, these policies that have been impacting us and hurting us for far too long, we need to bring numbers. We need to tell these stories with data. So it does make a difference. You know, Justice for Families, we have presented to over 77,000 system leaders. We've trained over 1,000 system leaders. We also have a family leadership institute that we train families and give them the professional tools that we all need to be able to advocate. Systems are very intimidating. You know, at one point I could have said 1 out of 6, you can't go wrong, but 1 was too many. 1 was too many. So with the work that we're doing individually as well, it does make a difference. Because if we don't support not just that young person and their family, but also the sibling, it is a unit. The definition of family, it's not just mom, sister, dad, and brother. In order to make sure that our young people succeed, we need to look at the family as a unit.
Absolutely.
And provide them with those holistic, those holistic support. My mentor used to say, until we don't meet the social and emotional component of our young people and take away those barriers so that they can succeed, it's going to be a challenge.
Absolutely, Jeanette. Really powerful points. And, we're going to explore some of those dimensions of this framework that we want to present to you as you think about having these conversations with juvenile justice personnel in your own jurisdiction. So let's move to that. On this slide here, Jeanette, these are many, we've been talking about some of the systemic policies and practices that are problematic. These are some of the barriers that we often hear, right, in talking with families who experience the system. And Jeanette, do you want to just briefly kind of capture at a high level some of these barriers that you often hear, from families?
I'm going to say that it's been happening for far too long. COVID really highlighted all these issues, and what's being demonstrated today across the country is the lack of how we address these issues: mental health, substance abuse. We can't continue thinking that incarceration is the solution to all the issues and all the underlying issues that we're facing. There's lack of resources in our communities. We have schools maybe in every 10, 20 blocks from each neighborhood. We do have a lot of grocery stores, resources that are not the crucial ones that we need. In order for young people and families to be able to meet the needs and comply with some of these mandates that are sometimes presented for them to succeed or get their children back or release, the distance is difficult. I'm going to share a little story about a meeting that I had a few weeks ago with a group of system folks from Iowa. They want to create a family advisory. They want to support young people, but there was no funding. And when we talk about barriers, that is one of the biggest barriers to providing families with all the resources and young people that they need. I said, if we have a meeting at 6 o'clock in the evening and I invite all your staff, they have to attend the 6 o'clock evening meeting. I know there's a bus that leaves at 5 o'clock, the last bus that would take you home 5 p.m., but I'm not going to worry about that. You figure it out. We won't provide refreshments. We won't provide childcare. And I'm expecting everyone to show up. We don't have any resources for this meeting, but I want everyone to show up. I said, would any of your staff show up? She said, absolutely not. I said, so we have to treat families and respect the space that they're in, whether it's mental, emotional, physically. We have to make sure that transportation is not a barrier from where they're traveling to, their home, to the destination where they're supposed to get their needs met. And the trust. When we want to support families, we have to make sure that we meet them where they're at. For far too long, there has been a mistrust of systems of families and families of systems. But we also understand that there's more similarities and more needs that we can all relate to than differences. So we know that families have their strengths, but families have all these barriers that they've been facing for generations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the good news is that there are things that the juvenile justice system can do to engage and support families. And we've seen that throughout the country. So let's talk a little bit about some of the strategies that can be implemented within the system to really engage and empower and support families. And if we could go to the next slide, please. As I mentioned, the goal of this webinar in part is to provide you with a framework for you all to use in your own conversations with folks who operate the juvenile justice system in your jurisdiction, to better understand how they're engaging, empowering, and partnering with families. And on the next slide, you see the framework that we have utilized at the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform when we think about these issues. And we're going to go in the next 20 minutes or so. We'll have to be efficient with our time, but we will review this framework for you and raise some of the key dimensions. And you see it's a 4-pronged framework. We'll get into each one of them. This is very much inspired by the work of the Vera Institute of Justice, as well as Justice for Families. But these are concrete steps that systems can take to really engage, empower, and partner with families. Next slide, please. So the first prong of this, and this is where you can begin to have conversations with your juvenile justice partners about how they're defining and identifying families in the first place. And Jeanette has already begun to speak about this notion of broadly defining family to identify the full set of supporters in the young person's life, and then using processes to identify that family and engaging them throughout the process. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, a key starting point in juvenile justice policy and practice is how juvenile justice agencies and systems actually go about defining family in the first place. And unfortunately, what we've seen historically in our field is that family has been defined in a really restrictive manner, limiting the definition to those individuals who are related by blood or through adoption or through marriage. And this means that systems are turning primarily to parents and legal guardians for engagement, which is a good thing, but it may be a missed opportunity, given that we know that young people who touch the system and those who don't also just come from a variety of family structures and backgrounds. So Jeanette, can you talk a little bit, as we need to move beyond this traditional definition of family, who are the types of individuals that systems should be engaging in addition to those who are related by blood or marriage or adoption?
I take it back to even my childhood, and some of you may relate. I grew up in the South Bronx, and everyone who lived in the building I lived in, I thought I was related to them until I got older. Because some of those folks who I see dearly, I call auntie or cousins, were the folks that tutored me, walked me to school when my mom was at work. So when we define family, it's more broader than just blood relation. We have advocates. Who is your circle of influence that can support you? We also know that young people are being also cared for by grandparents. We also know that we are folks that are connected to a faith-based organization, a faith-based leader, a family friend, a close family friend. When I was dealing with the courts, I felt that I was the only one that had to be in court. And if it wasn't for the job that I had for many years and they understood what family means, and when you're called out to call it off from a day at work, it's difficult when you have to go to court, when you have doctor's appointment, when you're overwhelmed as a parent with having to take time off from work. It is very supportive when someone else can go in your place, that it's not always the parent or the father, that it can be your neighbor who's an advocate in your community, that it can be someone that supports your family and your young person, a godparent. We have a lot of the work that we're doing in community right now with credible messengers and peer support, parent navigators, parent engagement specialists. We're looking to get a broader support with community when it comes to system involvement or even the development of a young person. We all need someone that can give us words of affirmation, help us make better decisions. We know that being a teenager is one of the most challenging journeys any person can deal with.
Yeah,
as adults, we forget as adults.
Yeah,
so it's important that we surround our young people with a circle of influence as we continue navigating systems.
Thanks so much for that, Jeanette. Very powerful. And so a question for your juvenile justice counterparts is just exactly how is that defined in policy? And here you've got some examples from San Diego County that we worked with, the probation department. You see that it's not just those who are united through biology, marriage, or adoption, but it's those connected through friendships or shared experience that are taken to be family members, including mentors, teachers, clergy, family, friends, others who support the process. Similarly, the Massachusetts Department of Youth Services, another juvenile justice agency, took that expansive view of policy. Next slide, please. Of course, it's not just about identifying, it's not just about defining families, but then juvenile justice systems really have to go about identifying those families and bringing them into the process. So we know from best practice that this means really working with the young person and the families themselves to identify who family is for them. They are the true experts. They can, on the individuals who can support the young person to succeed. And so we really have to be crafting processes that are youth and family driven, youth and family centered, and strength based. And there are several opportunities, you see them reflected on the slide here, throughout the life of a case to do that, at orientation, during case planning, during the reentry process. And there are various tools that systems can use, including the ones that you see here. And I think in the interest of time, I'll move on, but if folks have any questions about these types of tools at a granular level, I'll be happy to answer those questions. Next slide, please. So that's the first dimension is at a baseline level is how are we going about defining and identifying families. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about how we encourage youth and family connections while in placement. And again, I think that we've been clear that the field needs to move to a more community-based model. But for us, the question becomes, for those young people who remain in facilities, how do we make sure that we keep families connected to them? So for that, let me turn it back over to Jeanette to briefly cover this slide.
I got a little distraction with the chat box. But one of the things that, when we see an injustice or a difficult barrier when it comes to, incarceration, I think we've done significant changes and significant improvement here in New York, and many states across, like Seattle, they have their juvenile justice family advisory group. So there's positive things happening, but there's still so much work that needs to be done. We understand that incarceration is not a way of punishing kids or even restoring. We know that what young people need are resources, are relationships, are, you know, all the things that can provide a well-being environment. Everyone wants their young people to succeed. No parent want to see their children fail. It's one of the most difficult challenges anyone can deal with. But one of the things is that in detention, if a young person is placed, let's look at how we support that person as they enter a facility.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeanette. And the research is behind it, behind keeping those connections while the young person is in placement. I know that we're quickly running out of time, so let me just highlight some of the studies here that we have. I think folks would be interested in this. On the next slide, in Ohio, actually, the Vera Institute of Justice examined this question about whether there was a correlation between family visitation of young people while they were in facilities and whether that correlated with youth behavior and or academic performance. And on the next slide, what they found was, really remarkable findings, which was that there indeed was a correlation between family visitation and behavior and school performance. Those young people who were regularly visited by their families while they were in the facility were significantly less likely to be engaged in behavioral incidents at the facility. And those who were visited more frequently actually had a higher GPA. And that's even after controlling for a whole host of factors that might be associated with those factors. So really remarkable. Next slide. At a national level, researchers have replicated that study and have found similar findings. Again, family visitation being associated with behavioral incidents. And those also can impact staff feelings of safety. So in that light, it's not just a youth and family outcome enhancement strategy. It's actually a staff enhancement strategy as well. Next slide. So what should we do? And, Jeanette, I think that, both our organizations have focused on this in terms of really making it as easy as possible for families to visit the facilities. And here are some of the strategies. And Jeanette, before I turn it to you briefly, I just want to point out the picture on this screen, actually a family that hadn't seen their young person in, I think, over 2 years. And then finally, through video conferencing, they were able to have that face-to-face connection, and which just made a huge difference. But Jeanette, what would you say here in terms of what juvenile justice facilities can do?
And data proves it. The Vera Institute, did this wonderful research. We know that when families are connected, when families can visit, when the hours are flexible, when transportation is not a barrier, when you're not punishing a kid with, you know why you didn't do this today and you were a smart ass, you're not getting a visit. We take away the essential things that can make a young person feel safe. We also know that there's barriers with transportation when a young person is placed so far away from their community. We also know that there were policies that would prevent a younger sibling from visiting. We also know that phone calls were only given on specific days. So when we as system leaders and advocates, when we take away those essential things, those barriers, we know that our young people can succeed. We can't define the mistake and keep pulling them apart from their family. The wonderful thing, but we don't want systems and facilities to get used to the Zoom world, because we know that young people need their physical visit. It's part of our human nature. And it's important that they stay connected to the family. I felt that during the years that my son was away, I visit him every weekend. I made it my business to visit him every weekend. I was fortunate, but it was a challenge. I was traveling for 6 hours overnight. Not many families are able to do that if you have younger children. So we in New York, we changed policies that were affecting families. So it does disrupt, and it just pulls the family apart instead of keeping the family together.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, when you're having conversations with your juvenile justice partners, asking about their policies around in-person visitation, are the hours, the ones that are most convenient for system staff, or do they recognize that families are juggling multiple responsibilities and being as flexible as possible? Are we providing transportation? Are visitation areas really welcoming, particularly for younger children who may attend? Completely agree in terms of in-person visitation being the #1 strategy. But if that can't happen, are we supporting virtual visits? And then the other strategies that you see on the screen here. So really important to mention. Next slide, please. On the third program component of our framework, we really focus on engaging families in services and treatment themselves. And so here, what we're talking about is at a fundamental level, does the agency and do the system staff really treat family members and as valued partners, ensuring that their opinions are heard, that their needs are met? And this can be really daunting, when the differential of power, whether perceived or actual, is stark oftentimes. But in our view, it really begins by the agency and the system clearly delineating its commitment to family engagement and empowerment, in its vision, in its mission, its values, but also in the various ways it communicates with young people and families. And so one powerful example of this, you actually see this on your screen, is the Parents' Bill of Rights. This comes from the state of Texas. They decided to create this document. It's posted on their website and their various program offices. And it outlines the various rights that families have of the young people who are involved in the juvenile justice system. And it includes things like right to communicate, right to records. When you talk to folks in Texas, probably the most powerful provision in that Bill of Rights is the one that says that families have the right not to be judged or blamed or labeled because of their child's involvement in the system. And it's that type of messaging that we're talking about. Of course, the words are only as good as they're reflected in the everyday interactions with young people and families. And so this has to be reinforced with, by training, by supervision, quality assurance strategies, and we can talk more about that. Next slide, please. One key piece is, when families first touch the system, how are we going about communicating and simplifying the process as much as possible? As Jeanette has been talking about, this can be a very confusing and complicated system to navigate. So how do we make it as easy as possible to understand what's happening? Here are some examples from Connecticut. We worked with Connecticut to develop the way that they think about orientation. They created some videos for families, featuring families, walking them through the process. This is a written guide to the juvenile justice system. We see that all across the country as well. Next slide, please. One key piece of this notion of engaging in services and treatment are family team meetings. And, Jeanette, I know that you've thought a lot about this and supported jurisdictions on this. In our view, this is about creating case plans at the heart of the juvenile justice case of the young person and doing it in a way that really elevates the voices of young people and families so that they're part of the decision-making table. Jeanette, what are your thoughts about this dimension of getting families more involved in case planning?
It's important that when we engage families, I've looked at the work that I've been doing with families more as the work I was doing with families in the public school system. Whenever we had an IEP meeting with the school-based support team, we got counselors, therapists, for meetings, I tell parents, bring some advocates to help you understand the language, bring someone with you. Because many times as a family member, when we go into these meetings, honestly, I put myself in those shoes because I walk those shoes. You go into these meetings and there's so many professionals that everything sounds like a blur. And you walk out and, no one is explaining it. too many cases that we're dealing with. No one wants to stop for a second and explain a process. We know that a young person gets a lawyer, a court-appointed lawyer, and there's confidentiality. They don't speak to you, they speak to the child. So it's important that when we're engaging families in these discussions, that they can bring someone in their circle of influence as well, that can help them understand the language. And if there's a plan that was put together, that they can understand that plan because they were part of it. Not because I will also train families in the public school system to be positive, effective PTA leaders. But I used to always say, do not sit in a meeting like a bobblehead and sign and then walk away and say what happened in that meeting. We need to be clear about what we understand and what we can offer, and what we need support with.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. And I'm seeing affirmation in the chat about not using acronyms and legalese, and the language that we use is really important. So thank you for that. Next slide, please. Another dimension of this notion of engaging families in the treatment process is actually providing services directly to families. And we've talked about this already, but too often in juvenile justice policy and practice, we're not directly providing those services and supports to the families themselves. And, like we said earlier, the success of the child is linked to the success of the family. So really, as you have these conversations with your juvenile justice partners, asking the questions, what services and supports do families themselves get? Housing, parenting skills, therapy, behavioral health services, a whole range of supports. Jeanette mentioned, the role that credible messengers and family navigators can play. It sounds like we've got some peer coaches and peer support specialists with us today, which is wonderful, but that's exactly the type of strategies that we're talking about here. Next slide, please. And then finally, I want to just make sure that we've got a couple of minutes for questions here. So let me briefly just cover the fourth prong here and open it up to you all. But the last dimension here is really focused on how do we get the insight of families so that we can improve juvenile justice approaches, both at the case level, but also at the systemic level. And so really, this is about elevating the voices of families to improve the way that juvenile justice does its work. And there are a number of strategies that systems have implemented, can implement, although they need to go further in this direction. You see some of them listed here: family surveys, family liaisons who sit within agency offices who can provide supports to families, get insight, use that insight to improve processes, grievance processes as well, avenues for families to raise concerns and share their ideas for improvement, as well as family councils. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes there talking about the family council piece. Next slide. The Massachusetts Department of Youth Services actually is an example of a juvenile justice system that has partnered to develop a family advisory council. This is a really wonderful strategy. It's made up of family members of current and former system-involved young people. And this group comes together to provide guidance on agency policy and practice. And it's a really wonderful partnership. And, again, we know families and young people are the true experts. So systems have to be finding ways to elevate their voices in that way. So with that, before we open it up for Q&A, I'd love to turn it back over to Jeanette to close us out. On the next slide, we have a really powerful quote. And sorry, this is the newsletter that was produced in Texas as well. Communicating back to families is always important in terms of what the system is doing. But just to close us out, Jeanette, on the next slide, this quote from your report is really so powerful, and it speaks to, this is like much bigger than just a single practice or program, right?
Family engagement is not about one single policy or practice or program. Rather, it lives in the culture of an organization, and it is evidence, it is seen on how families are treated and partner with at the systemic level. I feel like we're in a position today that we've done significant improvement. And in the chat box, I noticed that someone wrote that other systems don't talk to each other. And until we don't start having those open conversations, it's not about blaming one system or being responsible for another system. 10 years ago, Vinnie Schiraldi, who was our commissioner, opened the doors to saying, how can I improve my system? And today I can say, because of him opening those doors, and Michael, you shared about the leadership and the vision, it has to come from the top. We have to trigger that passion and that vision, and also take care of those who are doing the work. Trauma is real, and being exposed to all that is real. We also know that families love their children. We want the best for them. But I, a mother of 6, did not give birth to 6 children and a manual. But I also know that love is powerful.
Jeanette, we have one question that's been, folks are dying to ask. Several people asked me about this. And I don't know if this is for you, Jeanette, or for Michael, but what about confidentiality issues with teachers and mentors? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
We've been conditioned to when we talk about young people and their teenage years, or, some of the challenges, in a way where many of us are not looking for solution. It's like, you know what, if this kid don't know how to act here, I don't want him in my classroom. Or I'm from suspension to detention to incarceration. We have to find ways, and there's scientific research that talks about the brain development of a young person. We also know that many of our young people have challenges, and we're dealing with generational issues today. The COVID highlighted all those issues. We inherited the disparities now in the health system. Housing, I heard about the housing issues when there's a young person that's been arrested or he's done time, returning back home to a housing development that can cause the family to lose their home. That's why it's important for every system to communicate. The same way we want to teach families to communicate with their children, systems need to communicate, because every system that we talk about is considered a system of care.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Jeanette, that with respect to confidentiality in particular, what we emphasize is that this really has to be a youth and family driven process. So when we're thinking about defining family, including some of those individuals that you've indicated in the question, it starts with what the youth and family want and perceive to be their family, and then creating clarity in terms of what the partnership will look like. We do want to avoid stigma. We want to be careful about engaging individuals who might use the information gleaned from the youth's involvement in the case in ways that are detrimental to the young person. But we can do it in a way that really is youth and family centered and consistent with the law. And in most juvenile justice jurisdictions, if not all, there are provisions that indicate that individuals who are serving a young person for the purpose of treatment, for the purpose of rehabilitation, are within the universe of individuals who can have access to that information. But it has to, for us, it has to start with what the youth and family want and what they define family, and then making sure that the information is not used in a way that's going to harm the youth, because that's not what this is about.
Michael, thank you for sharing that. Can I real quickly, Gail, when I enter the courthouse for the first time, I say, why am I here? My son is reinstated. He's not getting a superintendent suspension. He got a lawyer that the courts gave him, and I'm asking, he's not my lawyer. And I was asked to speak to corporation counsel if I wanted to resolve my issue with my son at the court. And I said, he's He's getting to school late. This is his first year of high school. So ain't about punctuality. He stopped going to his pro-social program. Can you make sure tell him to go back to his basketball program? And he may need tutoring. The person who I spoke to, Corporation Law Counsel, who I thought was a prestigious lawyer from Fifth Avenue doing pro bono work in the hood, was really the district attorney in family court, and the language is different. It's Corporation Counsel. And when my son's case was presented in front of the judge, Your Honor, this family has no control over her son. He's running reckless around the community, and he's not going to school. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I thought I said he's getting to school late. So language and understanding who you speak to is important. And when you're asking for resources, like lay it out exactly what you're asking for.
Thank you, Jeanette, and thank you, Michael. We had so much information to share that unfortunately we don't have any other time for questions, but I think this was just a fabulous presentation, so I appreciate it. You will be getting all this information sent to you in an email for attending, but at this point, I want to encourage you again that as you leave to fill out the survey, and then after you fill out the survey, you should get a certificate saying you were here. We have some upcoming exciting events, important strategies for family and caregivers and the family peer support workforce, working with families of the LGBTQ plus and children. We have the LGBTQ Center of Excellence, like we are the Family Center of Excellence. We're joining together next month to do a great presentation. It's always this time. It's the third Wednesday of every month, and we hope you enjoy that one. I want to thank everyone again, and a special thanks to Dr. Linda Goggin, NAVSTAC Principal Investigator, and my NAVSTAC team for helping us run today's event smoothly. Remember, I'll see you on May 18th for our next event. Thank you, everyone.